One, two, three.
In the year of our Lord, 1912, New Mexico and Arizona were admitted as U.S. states. The Republic of China was formed. The Summer Olympics were held in Stockholm. The Titanic made its maiden voyage. But most importantly, cinema was happening. And today I'm going to go over my top 10 movies for 1912. If you've never watched any old silent cinema, I would personally recommend it. It took me a while to get into some older movies. Even still, most of my watches are modern stuff, like my watch graph skews positive the more recent you get. But nonetheless, it's been a lot of fun and I think rewarding to get into some older stuff as well. It's fun to see movie history, for me at least. That's something I prioritize, so it's fun when you go through these older movies to see the medium developing before your eyes. I think in the case of this time period, 1912, the teens and even earlier, it's easier to get into these movies because they're almost all shorts. I know not everyone likes shorts that much. I love shorts. But I think the fact that you only have to commit to, maybe 10, 20 minutes to watch a film makes it easier to acclimate to the style. Because, 10 to 20 minutes, it's not a huge commitment. You can just sit down, bang one out, get a little taste for what it's like, come back whenever you're ready, try another one. So I would recommend checking these out if you're trying to get into older cinema. Not all of them are, these don't feel particularly modern, but nonetheless, it's, I think, fun to try out a different era, try to gain some appreciation for different movies, for a different time period, for a different way of doing things. So that's my sales pitch. Let's go into the top 10. Number 10. The Gardener. The Gardener was directed by Victor Sjöström, who for my money is the best silent film director. He would go on to direct feature films like The Wind and The Phantom Carriage, but he started out in 1912 making short films like this. His synopsis for the film. A gardener's son has fallen in love with the daughter of one of the workers at the nursery, and the two get married. The gardener then kicks his progeny off the property and begins to act despicably towards his son's wife. The, I think, biggest selling point of this film is an effortless villain, I would say. Some films take their time to establish the villain's character. There might be some uncertainty about who the villain is, something like that, some kind of ambiguity. But I think it's also impressive to have an instantly impactful and instantly recognizable villain. If you can do that within just a first couple actions, I think that's pretty impressive. Now, granted, you could also say that, you could have anyone do something terrible and have them be recognized as a villain. That doesn't take that much talent. But to me, the way the worker's father comes across, the gardener comes across, the titular gardener, is, I think, fantastic and great villain establishment. And additionally, I think the emotion really hits home for this film. This certainly is a tragedy. There is more to the story than just that initial premise with the main character's journey. But I think even though this is over 100 years old and the style is notably different, the emotion still hits the same way despite the clear and obvious differences from what we're used to. Number 9, The Mystery of the Rocks of Kador. This list, I suppose, actually starts off with back-to-back great villain characters. Count Ferdinand de Keramik plots against his niece in order to acquire her wealth to pay his debts. In this case, it's the uncle who is so completely given over to getting the inheritance that villain stuff. This is a longer film, 43 minutes. I think it's the longest on this list by a decent amount. And that gives this room for a little more progression and a little more story depth than you might see from the other entries here. That's not a negative to the other ones. That's, you make the film that you have the runtime for. But this is just a fact that there is a little more intrigue, I think, to this story than there are to some of the others. Great atmosphere in this movie. I think especially the lighting in a couple of scenes is wonderfully mysterious and ominous. And lighting variance is not something I think you get a whole ton of in some of these movies, so it's fun to see that element show up here. There are a lot of shots of people reading letters, which might sound like it breaks things up too much or like it's... there's a lot of letters in this movie, but the way they're shot, I don't know, they feel so at home in a mystery story for some reason. They're often shot in a completely different visual context than the way the person is reading them. Like someone will be reading them like on the Rocks of Kador, and they're shot with like this black background that clearly doesn't exist with different hands much closer, But I don't know, something about it just feels like it works. It feels mysterious, and that's the important thing, even though it doesn't necessarily fit the scenery. Good mystery movie, a lot of fun, interesting story. Go watch it. Number 8, The Land Beyond the Sunset. So this one is also a little bit sad in its own right, but kind of inverse of The Gardener, because it starts off with the sadness, and then this is ultimately like a story of hope and the power of dreams and fantasy. A young, poor boy goes on a field trip and dreams of escaping to a land beyond the sunset. So like I said, this is about poverty and dreams. The boy is poor with a rough home life, and he sees hope through this charity trip he's able to go on. The impact of even seeing possibilities beyond your own life, right? Like that's something that's easy to understate, because just seeing possibilities doesn't mean you can make change necessarily, right? You can see all the possibilities you want, but you may still be stuck in circumstances. But nonetheless, I think you hear enough stories of people being exposed to something new and realizing that something is possible for the first time, and the impact that makes on them. So I think the idea of realizing the possibility of something new, realizing the possibility of escape, is a powerful thing that is communicated well through this film. There are some nice moments of composition. Like, I love the simplicity of the intro, the black void, the way the newspaper seems to reach out to us, the audience. Even though this film is just 13 minutes, and maybe it's not as effective as it could possibly be at emphasizing his condition, it does enough. And it does enough to make the payoff seem worth it. And I think it really is a beautiful film in its short runtime. Number 7, The Musketeers of Pig Alley. Here we see our first D.W. Griffith film, and also a Lillian Gish appearance, who is a frequent collaborator of Griffith's. She is in, I believe, his most well-known stuff. Like, I think she's in Intolerance, if I remember right. Oh, Lillian Gish is also in Night of the Hunter, where she plays the, the owner of the orphanage or whatever, the older lady. Anyway, Musketeers of Pig Alley. A man recognizes the thief who had previously robbed him as one of the men involved in an unrelated mob shootout. If you never knew they were making gangster movies in 1912, now you know. And I think this honestly just goes in a kind of fascinating direction. And the story ties together so nicely, especially for only being 15, 17 minutes, something like that. There aren't that many plot points, but they fit together in a very satisfying way, I think. So I think the film strength is Act 3, which of course I won't go into. I won't spoil anything in this video. But there are some really great technical moments, I think. Like this really nice close-up shot. And, well, I guess the other one I can't say. Whatever. There's another nice moment there. Just everything, the way everything is put together there is super satisfying. It feels pretty punchy for 1912. And I think the story will go in a direction that I certainly didn't expect. I think is a fun style of resolution. And it goes back to everything being tied together so nicely. So I think it's well worth a watch. I think it's rather satisfying and unique and well constructed. And again, 15 minutes. Number 6, A Feud in the Kentucky Hills. This is another Griffith, not the last one on the list either. He was kind of the titan of cinema, I suppose, at this point. And this time we get Mary Pickford, who is another frequent collaborator of Griffith's. Feud in the Kentucky Hills. The letterbox description is way too long, so I'll just try to condense it. This film depicts a feud between two brothers over a woman, which ends up involving entire families in a war. So this movie is an interesting evaluation because of the score that I watched it with, which was not original to the film. Silent films did not come with music. They would often have some kind of accompaniment when they were shown in theaters, be it voiceover or live music or whatnot. So this music I watched it with is not original. It was part of the restoration on the Mary Pickford official YouTube channel, the restoration they did. So part of me wonders, like, is it even fair to give the movie credit for the music because the music's not part of the movie? But I also experienced the movie with the music. Maybe it is fair to rate, but I'm going to count the music as a benefit because that's my list and I really like the music. So the story has some really nice escalation in it. It's ultimately kind of about this woman who's stuck between social norms and has little agency in the grand scheme of things. Things escalate well from this interpersonal conflict to this larger familial conflict, this rivalry in the Kentucky Hills. And I think that transition is wonderful. Even if I'm not the hugest on the relationship part of the film, in terms of it being convincing, I do think it's good enough to drive us to our next point. And the action in the movie, I think, is compelling enough. People didn't necessarily have the most convincing bullet wounds and actions of being hit by firearms, I guess, but that's also a minor thing. I think it just goes well with the more theatrical style of filmmaking at this point. But it's fairly grim, like some of the earlier films. It's somewhat tragic, but yeah, I just love the way it progresses. I love the story it tells. You know, storytelling is timeless, and these films are still telling wonderful stories. Number 5 is The Dwarf. This is directed by Louis Feud, most famous for his serials like Les Vampires and Fantomas. A manuscript delivered to a playhouse is eventually turned into a major hit with critics and audiences alike. The only problem is that no one knows who wrote it. The actress of the play receives a call from the author, and the two quickly become friends. But the man won't give any details about himself. He has a secret. I'll give you 3 guesses what the secret is. The film is primarily about the tragedy of human preference. Human preference is, of course, a good thing. People should be able to choose what they want in general. But, you know, people are sometimes victims of that. But even more than that, it is a film about human cruelty and the extent to which human preference can carry us. You'll recognize the type of story when you see it. It is fittingly sort of a take on Cyrano de Bergerac, which is referenced in the film. And I think that's a really fun connection. Nice storytelling consideration. The pain and rejection and desire for, you know, hot people is well understood and can be sympathized with easily. So I think the emotional core of this movie is pretty timeless, and the execution is nice. And also, this is another movie where it benefits some from the aftermarket score. I think specifically the one I watched it with had a great section during the climax where it uses dissonance so well. Really enjoyed this movie a lot. Number 4, Friends. This is D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford again. The orphan Dora is courted by 2 different gold miners. That's the whole description, basically. This is an extremely sweet film. And it's sweet not actually for the romance, it's sweet for the friendship between the 2 miners. Because this isn't the typical rivalry. This isn't a feud in the Kentucky Hills. Although I think, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, they might have the same lead actor. It's so fun the way our perception of the initial guy that Dora is with changes through the film. And the way you see him interact with the other guy is so sweet and heartwarming, and even the way he behaves towards Dora. The second guy is wonderful as well. He's very joyous and a little more bombastic than the first guy, who's a little more stoic and fancy, higher class. Yeah, this movie is maybe the second closest I came to crying during watching any of these. I just think it's wonderful and sweet. And there are also some some kind of fun background extra characters in specifically like the bar scenes and whatnot too. So this one's a lot of fun, very nice. Good palate cleanser from some of the more emotionally draining stuff earlier on. Number 3, The Mills in Joy and Sorrow. So far on the list, we've had entries from Sweden, France, and the US, so now we get to add the Netherlands on here. And I'm actually thinking about it, I'm not sure if I've actually seen any other Dutch movies. I guess maybe besides The Vanishing, I think that's Dutch. But yeah, good way to get a little bit of Dutch film in your system. So this is the shortest entry on the list. I believe it's about 7 minutes. And thus, short description. A hobo takes revenge on a miller who didn't give him something to eat. Simple as that. Simple story, simple setup, fairly simple execution as well. But the visuals, honestly, for this one are the selling point. A good portion of this movie is hand-colored and extremely vibrant in the second half of the film. There are, I mean, honestly, the almost psychedelic colors in one part and then the intense red of another section of it are just stunning to me, at least. And yeah, I think the visuals in the climax especially are just really wonderful. Some of the best looking early cinema I've seen. And even beyond that, there's nice foreshadowing. The first half of the film looks fairly ominous. Yeah, it's compact and it's punchy. The look of the film matches the intensity of the subject matter. It's awesome. I love it. Number 2, My Baby. This is another film that gets a nice bump from the score. And it's D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford. This is a novel of a description, so I'm just going to condense it here. When a father's second daughter gets married, he has a difficult time letting go. This restoration, also on the Mary Pickford Foundation channel, looks beautiful, honestly. Like I said, beautiful score accompanying it, supporting it so nicely, and even providing a little bit of energy and, you know, ebbing and flowing with the film really nicely. It's such a universal film. Time has plans for everyone. Time changes people's relationships with those you love, those you care about. And there is a certain humility required of people to accept that and to continue living in spite of that. This movie is about the father having to come to terms with that. It's about bitterness. You know, they say bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And, you know, the father's just coming to terms with that. You know, the people you love have lives, and sometimes part of life is just coming to terms with that. It's a beautiful movie. Love the score. This is probably the closest I came to crying during any of these. This is a really sweet movie, I think. And then number one, of course, it couldn't be anything else. It's The Cameraman's Revenge, a delightfully absurd movie. It's about a jilted husband who takes his revenge by filming his wife and her lover and showing the result at the local cinema. Now you may be thinking, this is 1912. Can they really show any of that? Can they really be that detailed? Well, let me tell you, this movie is made using stop motion animation of dead bugs. Yes, you heard that right. This is about beetle marital infidelity. And it's just as delightfully absurd as you might imagine. It's funny, and there's this great whimsy in, some of the inner titles and the way the bugs have this like human behavior. I mean, it executes its goal perfectly, and it's an awesome goal. So, I mean, what more can you want from a movie? This is delightful. I mean, the way I put it, it may have sounded overly simple, like the gimmick is the whole reason to watch it. But the gimmick is only like half the reason to watch it. It really is nicely done. It's so funny. The absurdity that comes from using bugs to perform human actions is it's just wonderful. And this isn't even the only bug-related movie this guy made. Władysław Starowicz, he was an influential Polish-Russian animator who was making the first, stop-motion animated films using bugs for some of them, including the beautiful Lucanida, I believe was the first one he did. Cameraman's Revenge. He would go on to do other stop motion as well, not just involving bugs. But this is where he got his start, and it's really, really fantastic. I would recommend checking out some of his work even besides this. But that's the top 10. My goal is to do a top 10 list for a year in each decade. I already have 1963 done, so I will be doing that in a couple weeks, a video on that. And working on 1974 right now. For the 2020s, I'll probably do maybe 2022. Yet to start on the other decades, but those will be coming at some point. See you in the next video, which will probably be film movements.